fat woman ruined by gossip, was about to leave London, until the Duke declared she was his bride. Margaret Allstone stood at the edge of Lady Harrington's ballroom, the cruel whispers swirling around her like the winter fog that clung to London's streets. "There she is again," someone hissed behind a fan. "So desperate for a husband, she attends every social function, though clearly no gentleman would ever choose such a figure." Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she clutched her dance card empty save for her own neat handwriting marking the passing hours. 3 seasons in London society had yielded nothing but mockery for her fuller figure and modest background. Tonight was to be her final appearance before retreating to her aunt's cottage in Devonshire, away from the merciless tongue that had branded her undesirable. She smoothed the emerald silk of her gown last season's fashion, altered by her own hands, and blinked back the tears, threatening to spill. Miss Allstone appears determined to secure a match before she becomes entirely shelf-worn. Lady Arabella Winfield's melodic voice carried purposefully across the room, though I cannot imagine who would burden himself with such a wife. The gathered debutantes tittered behind gloved hands, their diamond bracelets catching the candlelight as they gestured toward Margaret. The orchestra paused between songs, creating that terrible moment of silence that allowed Lady Arabella's next words to ring clearly through the ballroom. "I hear she was rejected by Mr. Sinclair last month. Even he, with his gambling debts, found her too substantial a prospect." The laughter that followed seemed to echo from every corner of the ornate room. Margaret's vision blurred. The exit was just steps away. She could slip out now, pack her trunks tonight, and be on the morning coach. No one would miss her presence. No one would even notice she had gone. She turned, her skirts rustling against the polished floor, when the room suddenly fell silent. Henry Blackmore, the Duke of Ravenshire, stood in the grand doorway. His commanding presence drew every eye in the room, his tall figure impeccably dressed in black evening wear that contrasted with the emerald of his penetrating gaze. Unlike the other gentlemen who travelled in packs of jovial conversation, the Duke moved with solitary purpose, his expression unreadable. To Margaret's horror, he was walking directly toward her. Perhaps he too wished to add some cutting remark to her final humiliation. She had never exchanged words with the Duke. Few had, as he was known to be cold and unapproachable despite his immense wealth and status. He stopped mere inches from where she stood, and the room held its collective breath. "Miss Allstone," he said, his voice deep and clear enough to carry across the hushed ballroom. "I've been searching for you all evening." Before she could respond, he took her trembling hand in his gloved one and raised it to his lips in a gesture of unmistakable courtship. Margaret froze, certain this must be some elaborate jest at her expense. Yet the Duke's green eyes held hers steadily, with no trace of mockery. "I believe," he continued, "that I owe you an apology for my tardiness. I'd hoped to claim the first dance." Lady Arabella stepped forward, her perfect features contorted with disbelief. "Your Grace, surely you jest. Miss Allstone was just leaving, weren't you, dear?" The question dripped with venom. The Duke did not even glance in Lady Arabella's direction. Instead, he placed Margaret's hand firmly in the crook of his arm. "On the contrary," he announced, his voice echoing in the still silent room, "Miss Allstone could not possibly leave, as she has promised me every remaining dance this evening." Then, with a slight curl of his lip that might have been a smile, he added words that would change her life forever. After all, a man expects certain privileges when in the company of his future bride. The scandal sheets the next morning blazed with the news. Duke of Ravenshire announces engagement to unfashionable Miss Allstone. Margaret read the words through trembling fingers as she sat in her modest Bloomsbury drawing room, the coal fire burning low in the grate. Last night seemed a fever dream. The Duke's declaration, the horrified gasps, his hands steady at her waist as he led her through a waltz, while hundreds of eyes tracked their every movement. "It cannot be real," she whispered to her aunt, who sat opposite with a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten in her lap. "Why would he claim me as his bride? We had never exchanged so much as a greeting before last night." A sharp knock at the door interrupted her bewilderment. The maid entered moments later, eyes wide with awe. "Your Grace," she announced, and the Duke of Ravenshire strode in, bringing with him the scent of cold air and expensive cologne. He removed his hat, but not his gloves, standing tall amidst their faded furnishings, like a hawk among sparrows. "Miss Allstone," he said with a formal bow, "I trust you rested well after our eventful evening." His tone was courteous, but revealed nothing of his thoughts. Margaret rose, her legs unsteady beneath her. "Your Grace, I must thank you for your intervention last night. But surely you understand this charade cannot continue. I could never expect. This is no charade, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. He glanced at her aunt. Might I request a private word with your niece, madam? Once alone, the Duke's composure flickered, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath his aristocratic mask. I witnessed Lady Arabella's cruelty toward you. It was not the first time such a scene has played out in those ballrooms, though usually I remain a silent observer. Then why intervene on my behalf? Margaret asked, finding courage in confusion. He turned toward the window, his profile severe against the grey London light. Perhaps I grew weary of watching the strong devour the vulnerable, or perhaps ... He paused, fingering the gold watch chain at his waist. Perhaps I recognized in you something I have sought for years. And what might that be, Your Grace? She asked, hardly daring to breathe. Authenticity, he replied simply. You have never simpered or schemed. You face their cruelty with dignity. He turned back to her, his expression softening slightly. I propose an arrangement, Miss Allstone, a betrothal of 6 months, during which time you will be under my protection. No one would dare insult the future Duchess of Ravenshire. Margaret's heart thundered in her chest. And after 6 months, if you wish to end our engagement, I shall provide you with a cottage on my country estate and an allowance sufficient for comfort. You will never again need to face London society. She studied his face, searching for the trap. And what do you gain from this arrangement, Your Grace? Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Freedom from the matchmaking mammas who parade their daughters before me at every turn. Lady Arabella chief among them. Before Margaret could respond, another knock came, and the maid entered with a silver tray. Begging your pardon, but these have been arriving all morning. Upon the tray sat a mountain of calling cards and invitations from people who had previously snubbed Margaret without a second thought. The Duke raised an eyebrow. It seems your social calendar is suddenly quite full, Miss Allstone. Our engagement is hardly credible, Margaret said quietly. No one will believe that you would choose someone like me. The Duke stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over her figure in a way that made her breath catch. And what exactly are you, Miss Allstone? A woman deemed too substantial to be desirable, she answered honestly, her voice barely audible. To her surprise, his lips curved into a genuine smile. Then London society knows nothing of desire. He took her hand in his, and even through his glove and hers, she felt the warmth of his touch. Say yes to my proposal, Margaret. Allow me to show them, and perhaps you as well, exactly how desirable you truly are. The Countess of Pembroke's winter soiree marked Margaret's first public appearance as the Duke of Ravenshire's betrothed. Snow fell softly outside the mansion's tall windows as footmen announced their arrival. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire, and Miss Margaret Allstone. The room quieted instantly, all eyes turning to assess this unlikely pair. Margaret felt exposed despite her new gown, a creation of midnight blue silk that had arrived that morning with the Duke's card. She had spent hours before her mirror, scrutinizing her reflection, wondering what the Duke could possibly see in her that others had missed. Now, with his hand resting possessively at the small of her back, she forced herself to stand tall, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. Smile, my dear, the Duke murmured close to her ear. They are waiting for any sign of weakness. Lady Arabella approached, her white blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style, adorned with pearls that matched her pale gown. Your Grace, she said sweetly, ignoring Margaret entirely. Such a surprise, your announcement. The tongue speaks of nothing else. Her smile was razor sharp, though many wonder if congratulations are truly in order, or if perhaps you've suffered some temporary affliction of judgment. Margaret felt the Duke's body tense beside her, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. The only affliction I've suffered, Lady Arabella, is having overlooked Miss Allstone's charms for so long. He turned to Margaret with such warmth in his gaze that she almost believed his affection genuine. Wouldn't you agree that true beauty becomes more apparent the longer one looks? Before Lady Arabella could respond, the Duke guided Margaret away, his hand protective at her waist. You mustn't let her provocations affect you, he said quietly. I've endured worse, Margaret replied, surprised by her own steadiness. You shouldn't have to endure any of it. His voice held a surprising edge of anger. Tell me, who began these rumors about you? What caused such targeted cruelty? Margaret hesitated, then spoke softly so only he could hear. I refused an offer from Baron Sinclair last season. He did not take the rejection gracefully. The Duke's eyes narrowed. Sinclair proposed marriage to you, not precisely marriage, she admitted, cheeks flushing. His offer was of a different nature. When I refused, he spread tales that I had thrown myself at him, that I was desperate and undesirable. Given my appearance, society found his version more believable than mine. For a moment, something dangerous flashed in the Duke's eyes, a glimpse of carefully controlled fury. I see. His jaw tightened. And now he watches you from across the room, no doubt wondering how you managed to secure a duke when you refused a mere baron. Margaret followed his gaze to where Baron Sinclair indeed stood, his handsome face twisted with spiteful fascination. The man raised his glass in a mocking toast. The Duke's hand slid from her waist to capture her fingers, intertwining them with his own in a gesture far more intimate than propriety allowed. "Dance with me," he said, though it wasn't truly a request. The orchestra had begun a waltz, and as the Duke led her onto the floor, Margaret became acutely aware of how he moved with fluid grace that belied his powerful frame. When his arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer than was strictly proper, she found herself unable to look away from his face. "They're all watching us," she whispered nervously. "Let them watch," he replied, his voice low and intent. "Let them see how a man looks at a woman he truly desires." The heat in his gaze made her knees weak. "This is only a charade," she reminded him and perhaps herself. His thumb traced a small circle against her gloved hand. "Is it?" For a fleeting moment, his eyes dropped to her lips. "I find myself increasingly uncertain of that fact, Miss Allstone." As they turned about the floor, Margaret caught sight of Lady Arabella's furious expression, of Baron Sinclair's stunned disbelief, of countless other faces displaying varying degrees of shock and reassessment. But it was the Duke's expression, intense, possessive, almost hungry, that truly took her breath away. "You play your role convincingly, Your Grace," she managed to say. His lips curved into that rare smile. "Perhaps, Margaret, it is no longer a role at all." 2 months into their engagement, Margaret found herself seated in the Duke's carriage. It rolled through Hyde Park, a proper lady's maid across from them serving as chaperone. Outside, frost glittered on bare tree branches, and their breath formed small clouds in the chill air despite the warm bricks at their feet. "You're quiet today," the Duke observed, studying her profile. Margaret fingered the edge of her new sable muff, another gift she had initially protested, but ultimately accepted. "I received a letter from my cousin in Devonshire this morning. She writes that news of our engagement has reached even their small village. Everyone is quite astonished." "You mean they don't believe it?" he translated flatly. She looked up at him then. This man who had transformed her life with a few words spoken in a crowded ballroom. Over the weeks, she had come to know him better, his preference for strong coffee over tea, his habit of tapping his watch when contemplating a difficult matter, the small scar at his temple from a childhood riding accident. Yet in many ways, he remained as enigmatic as at the first night. "Even I struggle to believe it sometimes," she admitted softly. "Each morning I wake expecting to find this has all been an elaborate dream, that I'm still the Margaret Allstone who is leaving London in disgrace, not the woman who now receives invitations from duchesses and countesses who previously wouldn't acknowledge my existence." The Duke's expression softened. "And is that all this arrangement has brought you? Social acceptance?" She considered his question carefully. "No," she finally replied. "It has also brought me ... you." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Before he could respond, their carriage slowed as another elegant vehicle approached from the opposite direction. Lady Arabella sat within, accompanied by her mother. Seeing the Duke's carriage, she signalled her driver to stop alongside them. "Your Grace," Lady Arabella called, her voice honeyed despite the frost in her eyes. "And Miss Allstone, how ... domestic you look together." Her gaze lingered on Margaret with unmistakable disdain. "I've just come from visiting your aunt, Miss Allstone. Such a modest home. One can hardly imagine how you'll adapt to the grandeur of Ravenshire Court." Margaret felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but the Duke merely leaned forward, his shoulder pressing protectively against hers. "Fortunately, Ravenshire Court requires a mistress of substance, rather than superficiality. Lady Arabella, good day." He tapped the roof of the carriage, and their driver immediately pulled away. Once they had rounded a bend in the path, Margaret released a shaky breath. "She visited my aunt. Whatever for?" The Duke's expression darkened. "To gather ammunition, no doubt. She still believes our engagement to be some temporary madness on my part, isn't it?" Margaret asked quietly. He turned to her then, his gloved hand reaching for hers. Do you still believe that, Margaret? After these weeks together, the intensity of his gaze made her heart quicken. I don't know what to believe anymore. You've been kind, attentive, everything a true fiancé might be. Yet we both know this began as an arrangement. Arrangements can change, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Feelings can grow where none were planted. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jostling them closer together. For a breathless moment, Margaret thought he might kiss her, right there in the open carriage, with only her maid as witness. Instead, he reached up to brush a snowflake from her cheek, his touch lingering. I have something for you, he said, withdrawing a small velvet box from his coat pocket. Inside lay an emerald ring surrounded by diamonds, the stones catching the winter light. This belonged to my mother. I would be honored if you would wear it. Margaret stared at the ring, its significance unmistakable. This was no mere prop for their charade. This was a family heirloom, an intimation of permanence. Henry, she breathed, using his given name for the first time. Are you certain? More certain than I've ever been. He removed her glove with deliberate slowness and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though made for her hand. Will you come to Ravenshire Court with me next week? I would like to show you your future home, if you still wish it to be so. She looked from the glittering ring to his face, seeing genuine hope in his expression. Yes, she whispered, I would like that very much. His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds, rare and radiant. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth flooding through her despite the winter chill. Then it is settled. In 1 week's time, you shall see where we will build our life together. The promise in his words made Margaret tremble with something far more potent than the cold, with the dawning realization that what had begun as pretense had somehow, without either of them quite noticing, transformed into truth. Ravenshire Court rose from the misty landscape at something from a fairy tale, a grand stone manor with towers and gables silhouetted against the winter sky. As their carriage approached down the long, tree-lined drive, Margaret pressed her gloved hands to the window, wide-eyed at the estate that might someday be her home. It's magnificent, she breathed. The Duke watched her reaction with unexpected nervousness. It can be rather imposing at first glance. I hope you won't find it too overwhelming. Inside, footmen lined the entrance hall, bowing as the Duke led Margaret through a succession of grand rooms. The blue drawing room with its ceiling painted to resemble the sky, the library with thousands of leather-bound volumes, the portrait gallery where generations of Blackmores gazed down with the same emerald eyes as the current Duke. This will be your morning room, he said, opening a door to reveal a sun-filled chamber overlooking the garden. Unlike the formal grandeur of the other rooms, this one felt intimate, with comfortable chairs and flowering plants in porcelain pots. My mother preferred it to all other rooms in the house. She said the light here was perfect for reading. Margaret turned to him, touched by this glimpse into his past. You miss her very much, don't you? Every day, he admitted quietly. She would have liked you, I think. She had little patience for pretense. Before Margaret could respond, the butler appeared at the doorway. Pardon the interruption, Your Grace, but Lady Arabella Winfield has arrived unexpectedly. She insists on speaking with you on a matter of some urgency. The Duke's expression hardened. Show her to the gold salon. I shall be there shortly. He turned to Margaret. I apologize for this intrusion. Will you be comfortable waiting here? She nodded, though unease settled in her stomach as she watched him leave. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour, and curiosity overtook her. Following the sound of raised voices, she found herself outside the partially open door of the gold salon. Cannot possibly be serious about marrying her, Lady Arabella was saying, her voice shrill with indignation. Think of your position, your reputation. She's beneath you in every way. No connections, no fortune, no beauty to speak of. People are already whispering that you must have compromised her, that this is some sort of penance. Enough. The Duke's voice cut through her tirade like steel. You forget yourself, Lady Arabella. My choice of bride is not your concern, but it should have been me. The raw pain in her voice made Margaret wince. We have known each other since childhood. Our families have always expected. I never made you any promises. No, but you let me hope. There was the sound of movement, of fabric rustling. Henry, please, whatever game you're playing with this woman, end it now. I am willing to forgive this lapse in judgment. We can still have the future everyone has anticipated for us. A heavy silence followed, and Margaret held her breath, suddenly terrified of what his response might be. Had she been foolish to believe their arrangement might have evolved into something genuine? "There is no game, Arabella," the Duke finally said, his voice softer, but no less firm. "I intend to marry Margaret Allstone. I admire her courage, her genuine nature, her quiet strength, and yes, I find her beautiful far more so than those who hide cruelty behind pretty faces and polished manners." Margaret's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at his words. "You cannot mean that," Lady Arabella whispered. "She has bewitched you somehow. The only spell cast over me is one of my own making, the realization that I have found, quite unexpectedly, exactly what I never knew I was searching for." Unable to remain hidden any longer, Margaret pushed the door open fully, stepping into the room. Lady Arabella turned, her perfect features contorted with rage and humiliation. The Duke moved immediately to Margaret's side, his hand finding hers. "How convenient that you should eavesdrop," Lady Arabella spat. "A habit befitting your station, no doubt." "This is my home," the Duke said coldly. "Or rather, it soon will be Margaret's home as its mistress. You, however, are no longer welcome here." Lady Arabella's eyes narrowed to slits of pure venom. "You'll regret this choice, Henry, when the novelty wears off, and you're left with a fat, common wife who can never truly belong in our world. Get out." His voice was deadly quiet. After Lady Arabella had stormed from the room, Margaret turned to the Duke, her emotions in turmoil. "Did you mean what you said about admiring me, finding me beautiful?" He cupped her face in his hands, all pretense gone from his expression. "Every word, though I fear I haven't made it clear enough." He drew her closer. "The arrangement we began with has become something entirely different for me, Margaret. I no longer wish to pretend." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you wish for, then?" "To make our engagement real. To make you my Duchess, not for 6 months, but for a lifetime." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "I have fallen in love with you, Margaret Allstone, quite thoroughly, and against all my careful plans." The truth of his words shone in his eyes, and Margaret felt tears of joy well in her own. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been so afraid to believe it could be real, that someone like you could truly want someone like me." "Someone like me," he echoed with a gentle smile. "A man who kept the world at a distance until a brave woman showed him what it meant to truly live." He leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "I am the fortunate one in this match, Margaret. Never doubt that." And there, in the gilded salon of Ravenshire Court, with winter light streaming through tall windows, the Duke finally kissed his bride-to-be, not for show, not for spite, but for love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of gardens. Spring had come to London, bringing cherry blossoms to the parks and a sense of renewal to the air. In the grand cathedral, Margaret stood before the altar, her hands steady in the Duke of Ravenshire's firm grip as they spoke their vows. Her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk and handmade lace, embraced her curves rather than disguising them, designed, at her husband-to-be's insistence, to celebrate rather than conceal. From the pews, the cream of London society watched, their expressions ranging from genuine delight to barely concealed shock. In the front row sat Margaret's aunt, dabbing at tears of joy with an embroidered handkerchief. Conspicuously absent was Lady Arabella, who had departed for the continent shortly after her confrontation at Ravenshire Court. As the Duke slipped the gold band onto Margaret's finger, he smiled that rare smile that now belonged to her alone. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral. What no one else could hear was the whispered addition meant only for her ears. "My beautiful, courageous bride." The Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, and Henry Blackmore, Duke of Ravenshire, kissed his Duchess with such tender reverence that even the most sceptical onlookers found themselves moved by the obvious devotion between them. Later, at the wedding breakfast held in the Duke's London mansion, Margaret stood beside her husband, receiving the congratulations of guests who had once shunned her. She wore her happiness like a crown, her newfound confidence evident in the straightness of her spine and the warmth of her smile. "Lady Pembroke just told me, always knew, we would make a perfect match," Margaret murmured to Henry, with quiet amusement. Apparently, she had noted our compatibility from the very beginning. He laughed softly, his hand at the small of her back. "How convenient that everyone now claims to have approved all along, and those who truly did not approve will learn to do so, or find themselves unwelcome in our home." His gaze turned serious. I will never allow anyone to make you feel less than the treasure you are to me, Margaret." As the celebration continued around them, the Duke led his bride away from the crowd and into the quiet of the adjoining conservatory. Surrounded by exotic blooms and bathed in dappled sunlight, he presented her with a small velvet case. Inside lay an exquisite fan of ivory and lace, a traditional gift for a new bride, he explained. Though perhaps not entirely traditional in its meaning, Margaret opened the delicate fan, admiring its craftsmanship. "What meaning would that be, Your Grace?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "That unlike most ladies of society, you need never hide behind it." He closed the fan gently in her hands. "You need never conceal your thoughts or feelings from me, nor pretend to be anything other than exactly who you are, the woman I love in all her genuine, unaffected glory." Margaret's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Even when society whispers that you could have chosen a more conventional duchess, especially then." He drew her into his arms, uncaring of who might see. "Let them whisper. Let them wonder how a cold, distant duke came to cherish a woman they foolishly undervalued. Perhaps some will learn from our example that true worth lies beneath the surface, and that love sees clearly what others miss entirely." She reached up to touch his face, this man who had first offered protection, and then, unexpectedly, his heart. From being nearly banished from society to becoming a duchess, it seems impossible. "Not impossible," he corrected gently. "Merely a recognition of what should have been obvious to all, that you are always worthy of love and respect." He kissed her again, a promise sealed between them. "And I shall spend a lifetime ensuring you never doubt it." As they returned to their wedding celebration arm in arm, guests raised glasses in toast to the Duke and his unconventional bride. What none could see was the private vow exchanged in the pressure of their fingertips, intertwined a promise of a life built on truth rather than appearance, on love rather than convention, and on the courage to defy expectations in pursuit of genuine happiness. In the years to come, the love story of the Duke of Ravenshire and his beloved Margaret would become legendary in London society, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful roses bloom in unexpected gardens, if only one has the wisdom to truly see.